At the beginning of the 20th century, the British Empire controlled territories on every inhabited continent. Nearly 1 in 4 people on Earth lived under British rule. From India to Egypt, from Nigeria to Palestine, British authority reshaped political systems, economies, borders, and cultures on a global scale. British leaders spoke of progress and civilization, but for colonized peoples, empire meant foreign domination. Understanding British colonization requires more than slogans. It demands examining how Britain ruled, what it changed, what it destroyed, and why its legacy still defines global inequality and conflict today. This is the story of how power was built and what it cost. British colonization began with merchants, not soldiers. In the late 16th century, England entered overseas trade to compete with Spain and Portugal. English traders sought spices, cotton, silk, tea, and later raw materials such as rubber and minerals. Early ventures focused on coastal trading posts rather than inland conquest. However, trade soon required protection. Local rulers taxed or restricted British merchants. Rival European powers attacked ships, and markets became unstable. To secure profits, Britain built forts, stationed troops, and interfered in local politics. Over time, commercial protection turned into political domination, not by accident, but by necessity of empire. The East India Company was not a nation. It was a business. Yet by the mid-18th century, it ruled vast areas of India. It collected taxes, enforced laws, minted
Full
currency,
payment.
and
No
commanded an
exceptions.
army larger than that of many European states. This was corporate colonialism on an unprecedented scale. Company officials enriched themselves, while local populations bore the cost. Heavy taxation, land seizures, and grain exports contributed to repeated famines. British parliamentary inquiries openly documented corruption and abuse. Still, the company continued because it generated immense wealth for Britain. By the 19th century, British imperialism relied heavily on racial ideology. Colonized peoples were described as inferior, backward, or incapable of self-government. These ideas were reinforced by pseudoscientific theories claiming Europeans were biologically superior. This worldview justified domination. If colonized societies were uncivilized, then British rule became a moral duty. Edward Said showed how Muslim and Asian cultures were depicted as stagnant, irrational, or despotic, narratives that erased complexity and justified control. Britain claimed to bring law and order, and it did establish courts and bureaucracies, but colonial law was unequal by design. Europeans were often exempt from local jurisdiction, while colonized people faced harsher punishments. In Muslim societies, Islamic legal systems were deliberately weakened. Sharia courts were restricted to family matters, while political and criminal law was transferred to colonial authority. According to Wael Halak, this destroyed indigenous legal sovereignty and centralized power in foreign hands. British colonization restructured economies to benefit Britain. Colonies exported raw materials and imported British manufactured goods. This prevented local industrial development and locked colonies into dependency. India's textile industry is a clear example. Once dominant globally, it collapsed under British trade policy favoring British factories. Economists like Utsa Patnaik show how colonial wealth financed Britain's industrial rise while impoverishing colonies. Colonial famines killed tens of millions. These were not unavoidable disasters. Amartya Sen proved food was often available, but people could not afford it due to taxation and export policies. British officials continued exporting grain during famines. Market ideology mattered more than human survival. These decisions were documented and debated, and still enforced. British rule depended on force when challenged. Massacres, collective punishment, detention camps, and executions were used to crush resistance. The Amritsar massacre was not unique. It was symptomatic. Caroline Elkin's archival research shows systematic torture and forced labor in Kenya's camps. Violence was bureaucratic, legal, and justified as maintaining order. British colonization dismantled Muslim political authority across India, Egypt, Sudan, and beyond. Caliphates, sultanates, and Islamic governance structures were replaced by colonial administrations. Muslim intellectuals like Muhammad Iqbal warned that colonialism weakened both political power and cultural confidence. These critiques fueled reform movements and anti-colonial resistance. One of the least discussed aspects of British rule was control over education. School systems taught colonial history, glorified empire, and marginalized local knowledge. Frantz Fanon and Ngugi wa Thiong'o argued this created psychological domination, teaching colonized people to view themselves through imperial standards, weakening cultural confidence. Before British involvement, Zionist leader Theodore Herzl approached Sultan Abdul Hamid II in the late 1890s, offering financial support for the Ottoman Empire in exchange for Jewish settlement rights in Palestine. The Sultan firmly rejected this, refusing to sell or divide Muslim land. After World War I, Britain controlled Palestine and issued the Balfour Declaration. Muslim historians like Rashid Khalidi document how Britain facilitated Zionist institutions while suppressing Palestinian political rights, laying the groundwork for long-term conflict. Britain rarely forced cultural conversion violently. Instead, it used incentives. English education, government jobs, and legal advantage rewarded those who adapted to British norms. Over time, this marginalized local languages, traditions, and elites. Cultural transformation occurred structurally, not suddenly, but its effects were profound. After World War II, Britain lacked resources to maintain empire. Independence movements grew stronger, often after decades of repression. Decolonization was rushed, borders were drawn quickly, institutions left weak, and conflicts unresolved. Consequences still visible today. Former colonies continue to face economic inequality, political instability, and identity struggles rooted in colonial restructuring. Empire did not vanish, it transformed. Understanding this legacy is essential to understanding today's global power imbalance. The British Empire shaped the modern world through trade, law, violence, and ideology. Understanding its history honestly is not about hatred or nostalgia. It is about truth. Only through understanding can societies move forward with clarity. If you have watched until the end, please consider leaving a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, and until next time.